All right, hello and welcome to another episode here of Red Spin Sports. Today we have a special guest from Buenos Aires, Argentina, and Esteban Almiron. Did I say that right? Almiron? Yeah, Almiron. All right. Anyways, he's a designer and programmer. Focuses on issues of the relationship of big tech and politics. Political commentator. Has worked with Ben Norton of the Grayzone on a long, extensive research piece on the Argentine debt crisis and the intentionally unpayable loan the IMF issued to Argentina that's had major implications there. We might get to that. But the thing I really wanted to have Esteban come on was seeing the Twitter thread he put together. I guess it's been about a month ago now. I can't believe it. But on the passing of real anti-imperialist, people's champ, is how they call him, hero Diego Maradona from the slums of the outskirts of Buenos Aires, Argentina, and sort of the trajectory of his life path. And what the Twitter thread he put together really did that I thought was fascinating was kind of respond to the chorus of just absurdly hypocritical criticisms of Maradona. It doesn't mean that he didn't have issues in his life. It's just that in a country I can speak from, like the United States, where we constantly forgive athletes for all sorts of indiscretions, and we love these sort of comeback stories. It's clear that if he would have not been so close and so committed to resisting Western, NATO-backed like U.S., UK, NATO hegemony in the world, that there would have been no problem with forgiving Maradona's sins. But the issues were clearly political. And on that note, I want to bring in and welcome Esteban to the show, and maybe just sort of started off, kind of kick off like what your reaction was watching the mainstream corporate press in the U.S. and in Europe really slander posthumously an icon, as someone who has done so much in standing in solidarity with oppressed peoples from Venezuela to Palestine and Argentina and all over, and of course in Italy, where he played most of his career and coached. And kind of what sort of inspired you to kind of get on that thread and felt the necessity to do that?
Yeah. Thanks, Nate, for the nice introduction. I'm not a big football fan, and I'm not even a particularly big fan of Diego Armando Maradona, but I thought it was very interesting to talk about Maradona a little bit. I think it's a very emblematic character with an incredible life, a very interesting story, almost a story that sounds like the hero's journey, somehow, with a lot of failures and falls and recoveries and victories and so on. So it's interesting. And of course, interesting from my point of view, and probably yours as well, also because of his commitment to anti-imperialist causes and his support for anti-imperialist leaders in Latin America and stuff like that, which is something quite rare among I would say stars of the show business and even sport business. I was quite surprised because the kind of vicious attacks against Maradona were quite common in the early 90s in Italy, where I used to live as a child and a teenager. And they were common for a reason. Maradona was very contemporary at the time, and he had somehow humiliated the big teams and rich teams of the North, and there was some kind of frustration and envy around that. But 20, 30 years later, still being so viciously angry with this guy because he did cocaine or he had some addiction problems, and he was he made some mistakes in his life and something. It's kind of interesting to analyze, I think. Mm-hmm. the Murdoch media, I don't remember if it was the Australian. I think the Australian made a posthumous hit piece on Maradona, criticizing him for things from obesity to sexual harassment.
Real quick, because that's the one that some listeners might listen to and say, oh, well, that really is fair, especially in an era where we're so quick to kind of cast people aside as being bad. I guess the Me Too era. And how much? I mean, what were the actual issues? I mean, I know he had a lot of children. But I don't mean I hate to cut you off, but it's just I just really want to make sure we're clear about this because, there's so many domestic violence is rampant in U.S. sports. I mean, there has been. I mean, there's better focus on it now, and I think there is some improvement and greater consciousness in athletes that are becoming more politically conscious, and we can get to that later on. But what specifically were the issues? I mean, and were they anything that if he didn't have the politics he had, didn't come from the class background he had, that would have been anything that would have really moved the needle in terms of eliciting this kind of outrage, I guess, from the mainstream press?
I mean, as far as I know, I'm only familiar with two cases of accusations and allegations in the last 10 years. And before that, the only thing that I think there is to notice is the fact that Maradona had a few relations outside marriage that ended with children. I don't know how many, maybe 3, 4. I don't know exactly. I think he recognized 1 or 2 of them later on. I don't think he never had actual accusations of sexual violence or anything like that. The accusation of sexual harassment came in 2018, only 2 years ago, and he was 58, in Moscow, from a supposed journalist, but I'm not even sure that she was a journalist, who apparently wanted to interview him, and she says that he started to try to get her clothes off, and actually, the people close to Maradona said that it was actually the other way around. She was taking her clothes off, and then Maradona and the rest of the people, and Maradona asked her to leave.
Right.
And so I don't know exactly. In short, there is this, and there is a video of 8 years ago or 6 years ago of one of Maradona partner at the time was a stable partner for several years. Yeah. That put a video online when apparently Maradona was probably saying shouting something to her. And there was some reaction in the social media, but then later on, she said publicly in an interview that Maradona was never violent with her. So as far as I know, but I mean, I might miss something, and I apologize if I do. I'm not a biographer, but I don't know details that about extreme violence by Maradona.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I don't either, and I think that it's clear that, I mean, look, first of all, one thing I've talked about, I had a professor on who I think wrote a great book, and I like to try to promote it when I can, because I think it really is valuable, because it's called The Power of Sports by Michael Serrazio, Media and Spectacle in American Culture. Recommend getting this, published by NYU Press. He's a professor of communications at Boston College. But kind of what he gets at is really showing really how, in a lot of ways, modern sport in American culture, and the same in Europe, really, you could say, just with the major soccer teams or football teams, as they'd be called there, the spectacle that goes into it. You look at a society, and anthropologists usually look at the larger structures, and can really derive a lot of, a lot of conclusions and about what was most important to those people, what was most important, most valued. And in a world where within neoliberal capitalism that's very alienating. It's very much espouses an ethos of like, you know, if you're not able to pull yourself up by your bootstraps, if you can't kind of cut it, if you're having maybe mental health issues, or all this feel good type stuff, but you know, about, oh, we care about mental health, call this 1-800 number to talk to someone or whatever. But if they really cared about it, you know, Medicare for all would be a thing, right? They would want to make sure that it wasn't based on whether you lost your employer sponsored health care like we have in this country or not. But nonetheless, with sports, it's like what I'm trying to get at as it relates to Maradona is like we someone like LeBron James, someone like Michael Jordan, someone like Diego Maradona, right? Kobe Bryant. These people are lifted up on a pedestal of international fame and like to be like a consumable product. We live in this ultra consumer based society that that people are able to like really kind of establish and sort of like live vicariously through those people, and like they're more like perfected versions of like what a lot of people like kind of fancy themselves as being, or like having the ability to, you know, be charismatic but also be athletic and to do in the lifestyle that enables is in a world where we're so fragmented by class and so many people's dreams are just that, dreams of childhood that then get crushed by the daily reality of the grind of going into the office and just sort of working for some whatever you don't even shit you don't really even care about, and just to sort of get your paycheck to keep your 401k and just the basic things you need to sort of stay alive. It's solidarity is not something that is valued in the West, right? It's not, and it's something that's really antithetical to what it's about. It's looked at as silly. You know, when they have parades in Cuba, it's always like, oh, look how like all these people are being forced to go out there or whatever. The idea that people could just want to like build something together, like have solidarity, build something that's not just about individual gain is foreign. And like in the context of sport, like, so what it does is religion attendance has waned in the West, and like, but sport has in a lot of ways become that place where people extract meaning from, you know, being able to gather in large places, not during COVID, of course, but gather in large places, have a sense of shared identity. You could even say an imagined community, right? If you're a fan of you know, I don't know, Bayern Munich or Arsenal or you know, Real Madrid or you know, Napoli or whatever your team is, or Milan, that becomes like an identity that even whether it's not maybe rooted in, you don't have anything, you don't know the people you're standing next to, but that identity, oh, I'm a Milan fan, oh, you are too, okay, we have something in common, is powerful. So just a long-winded way of getting to the way I'm setting this up about Maradona is there's this like obsession with like catapulting people to stardom at such a young age. And Maradona was like extraordinarily young when he was brought into the spotlight, but then almost like reveling in their demise, because it's like, and like, my point sort of is like, and like, you can kind of take this wherever you want, but what do people expect? You know, someone who is like thrust into a spotlight, cannot live any semblance of a normal life, is taking care of his family, this, you know, something like 13 siblings, maybe the number might be slightly off, but a huge number, maybe 12 or 13 siblings, and having all this responsibility of stardom, and then to act surprised that they look to like drugs and other things like that to try to like let them escape a little bit, like when the world is just constantly closing in around them, and all these people are making money off it. They're extracting so much meaning from watching him play, from watching their team play, and yet there's this weird relationship, I think, in sports where people want to prop people up, and then sort of the media, at least, really kind of enjoys tearing people down, and especially if you start challenging orthodox political positions. And I think that's where we could pick up here, is that, you know, what we're like, I guess we could go back to Maradona's background, but sort of his politics that sort of enraged like the you know, the bourgeois press, essentially, in Europe and Italy, Spain, the UK, and the US, to really get him on
Sure.
their bad list.
Sure. I think that Maradona started to be very political after being, after he left football, professional football, basically, when he retired. But he was already showing some kind of rebellious attitudes and that were certainly unnerving or frustrating some environments. And this is, if you look at his trajectory in his experience in Barcelona, and the reason why things didn't work in Barcelona, but they worked very well in Naples is telling, because let's think for a moment, what is Barcelona and what is Naples? Like Barcelona is, the football team of Barcelona is one of the most important football teams in Europe. And it was already at the time when Maradona moved, was actually bought with a world record, historic record amount contract to transfer him from Boca Juniors in Argentina to Barcelona in 1982. Already at that time, Barcelona was, of course, one of the two biggest teams in Spain and one of the most important teams in Europe, that had won a lot of awards, etc. Well, Naples was the exact opposite. Naples was a team that had won nothing, like almost nothing. And also, what is Catalonia, like the region of Barcelona, and what is Naples and Campania, the region of Naples? Like Catalonia is one of the richest regions in Spain and one of the richest regions in Europe, actually. Campania is one of the poorest. And Naples is certainly the poorest large city in Italy. So it's incredible that Maradona, as a superstar, ended up feeling well and performing much better and spending much more time in a city like Naples than in a city like Barcelona. And in Barcelona, actually, his career was, everything was wrong. He wasn't in the right place. He was the only Argentine in the team. Actually, in the Spanish championship was quite rare to see foreigners at the time. So the team was, as I said, like a very important team. So playing for Barcelona was like, okay, you are playing for one of the best teams in the world. So you have to be thankful. But at the same, you will earn a lot of money, you will be celebrated and everything, but at the same time, you will have to comply with a lot of rules. You have to be disciplined. You have to kind of respect the company, respect the hierarchy, etc. But that was complicated for Maradona. Apparently there are stories about his brawls and arguments in the bars of Barcelona and stuff like that. And then, one of the most dramatic parts of his life in Barcelona was when he suffered a very serious injury from a player of Atletico Bilbao in 1983, that almost destroyed his career. Atletico Bilbao played a very aggressive game, and this player called Goicoechea, who was nicknamed the Butcher at the time, who reivindicated the fact that he had harmed Maradona seriously, and said that he would do it again. And there was a lot of conflict in the media, very, very aggressive, because Maradona was very good player. And it was annoying also to have this little man from Latin America coming to Europe and winning, and
it's like the guy didn't. It was like not only not in the club, but he also had an appearance they also didn't like. So it's like combining the fighting. Oh, he's just like, it just goes against our sensibilities type BS, and offending our what the great game should be, which is about artistry and all that. Which it should be, but like it's clearly, don't you? I guess I would assume that based on what I've heard you say already, you would agree. There's a very classist dynamic in the criticisms of Maradona.
I think so, yeah. I think so, and And I think the end, like the tensions in the company in the Barcelona were very strong. The president and Maradona didn't, were always like there was a very tense relation between them. And then there was a final 1 year after this injury I was talking about that was pretty famous final between, again, Atletico Bilbao and Barcelona. Still, the Butcher was playing, Goicoechea, and the match was extremely tense, very aggressive. For the people who maybe are not super sport experts, I mean, Maradona was an attacker, and he was small and very fast, etc. So he suffered a lot of falls during the game, of course, because you had to take him down, otherwise, it was over. And so, like, if people who talk about Maradona as a violent person, who, in my opinion, wasn't at all violent, actually, all the opposite.
Yeah.
But you should see like the kind of falls that he was suffering.
It's because like it's stuff that would be totally like forbidden. I mean, it would be like it would get players like almost probably expelled from the game in this day and age. But it's like because like it seems to me at least because it was him, like he was constantly taking like violent, like sort of, slide tackles and stuff that you just don't see in soccer really at all anymore. So it's like, it's sort of like the U.S. like acting as if anybody who's been wretchedly oppressed by neoliberalism, who starts to like actually fights back for, their own autonomy, their own sovereignty, whatever, is suddenly, they're being so violent. In a sports context, it's like, oh no, he's not just letting people beat the crap out of him, sort of thing. Is that a fair analogy, or is that?
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I don't know. Like, it's a game, of course.
Yeah.
But there was. There's an exaggeration in representing this evil little guy, from the global south, that comes here and they'll play better than us, and So yeah, I mean. That match ended badly because it ended with the historic brawl in front of the king. It was the King's Cup. The king was there in the stadium. It was the last match of Maradona in Barcelona. After that, the president decided, okay, you have to go.
And who was the king? Who was the king of Spain at the time? Then I guess.
I don't remember.
Or what was? Is this like the
same?
The royal, basically one of the Spanish royals or whatever.
It's the king that Franco basically decided had to be the king at the time. I don't remember exactly the name and the number, but he was put there by Franco, so it wasn't put there by a
dubious connection there, right?
Yeah. So that was the end. There was the end of Maradona in Barcelona. It's interesting because I think. Because the relationship was so bad, and of course there wasn't too public. This is where Ferlaino, the president of Naples, actually came in and at the time and actually understood that Maradona wasn't happy in Barcelona, and managed to have a meeting with him apparently, and they started to talk about the transfer to Naples, and after some negotiations with the Barcelona, they actually secure this new record contract and blah blah, and moved transferred him to Naples, which was an incredible thing for the city and for the team itself, because the team was a relatively weak team, even if playing in the top league in Italy, and it was something very, very, very important for them.
Yeah, this would be a good time just to sort of, if you could, just summarize. Like, I know for American listeners, like there's, I think a good analogy maybe to the Italian dynamic is like, the American South is looked at as the, despite having some very wealthy people, it's a highly unequal place and characterized by like widespread poverty. And definitely the coastal elites, New York and LA and DC type crowd looks at people in Alabama and Mississippi and Louisiana as like, just rednecks, like, people that are not very sophisticated and all that. And like, is it sort of a similar attitude between Northern Italians towards people from Naples, people from southern Italy in general, that they're unclean, they're unwashed, they're dirty and all that kind of stuff. I saw a video one time of like, I think people, I forget which club it was, but Maradona was playing, I think in maybe Florence or maybe it was Milan but they were all just like chanting stuff like about like how dirty and unclean, the Naples people were, Naples players were, and Maradona specifically.
Could be. Yeah, there's certainly something like that. I wouldn't know. Like, there's some racism, of course. It's not necessarily mainstream. Well, it's like the United States. Not everybody would say. What you were saying about rednecks and the Southerners, but of course it's very strong. Maybe you heard about the main far right party in Italy that is called Lega. Right. The Lega, or the North League, is actually a party that was born in the early 90s from like these wealthy North. Racist North that wanted to kind of get rid of the South, basically, and become a separate nation. Then in the years they integrated with the Roman establishment. They mixed with Berlusconi, with other fascists, etc. in Italy. So they kind of normalized. So they're not interested in secession anymore. They are mostly just far right people and politicians, and just play with racism. So there is certainly a huge divide between the North and the South in Italy. It has a strong roots, historic roots that come from very, very, they are very old. The southern part of Italy has been occupied by foreign forces, basically colonized for 5 centuries, basically. And when Italy was unified, it was basically the north that occupied the south. It's not something, the union of Italy didn't happen as a union of provinces that met and decided to stay together somehow, or it was basically, an invasion, and the conditions of the South has always been worse than the North. The North is much more industrialized, started industrialization much earlier. And the biggest football teams in Italy, those that won most prizes are in Milan and Turin. Turin is actually the former capital of the Kingdom of Italy that basically unified Italy. So this is really North versus South, and Naples wasn't not even near getting, not even close to get a championship for decades when Maradona arrived.
Yeah.
So
No, interesting. So, I mean, I was just going back through, the tweets you put through, and you mentioned like that essentially the racism, mostly of the wealthy North, where Lega was created in the 90s, today's far right, was ultimately unleashed on him in a major way to kind of characterize him of all the things they despise, like Southern Italian, Southern Global South, and also Southern, representing Naples now, working class, unapologetic, rebel, and a genius. So talk about maybe the part where for them so much a lot of this was maybe wounded pride. I mean, and then how once he stopped playing, we had the issues too of you tweet about Henry Kissinger's role later on in this, and how in terms of with when he failed a doping test, which is hilarious when you think of how many Major League Baseball players have failed doping tests, and this really was not that big of a deal, right? I mean, from what I understand, it was something that we here in the States can buy at GNC, from what he, and maybe what was it exactly? Do you remember what he tested positive for? It was some kind of
he tested positive with the ephedrine, a pseudoephedrine,
Yeah.
I'm not an expert, to be honest,
No,
but
that's,
what I know
that is not.
yeah.
That's not like people take that now. It's not even really that. So anyway, I just want to make that clear.
No,
That
no,
it's not like
actually,
steroids or anything, you know.
no. Actually, the point is the amount. Is not the substance itself. Is how much you take it. And apparently, from what I know from articles that have been written by the Argentine press, the amount he took in 1994 are not considered doping today because it's less than that amount. It was a fat burner kind of drug that one of his assistants actually bought in a U.S. pharmacy.
Yeah,
and he was taking at the time because he was doing a very, very strong diet. He
right.
prepared for that World Cup like very strongly. Like it was.
I mean, this is wild. I have the tweet pulled up that you put out, and it's like we're talking about Rip Fuel, which is something that I took as I was growing up playing, trying to gain weight as it just also strength and endurance playing American football. I mean, you said Maradona was found positive in '94 for taking a product like Rip Fuel. That one of his assistants bought without a prescription at a Walgreens pharmacy, right? These people are so disingenuous that they're going after him. This is like pseudo-metaphren. Pseudo is, I mean, that's in all the cold medicine type stuff people take too. It's become a little more in the news because in recent years, it's like there's all these people that try to go into pharmacies and buy up a lot of it to, I guess it's an ingredient that used to make crystal meth. That was not even an issue back then. It's clear that like this was absolutely just an opportunity that they didn't want to miss. So maybe like use this. Let's like zoom back for a second though, because I think it's important I want to get to that 1986 World Cup before we get too far ahead. And it kind of like, so he signed, I think you said it was 82. He goes to Naples. Am I right on that?
In 84. In 82, he goes to Barcelona. And
Barcelona, 84, Naples. Yeah. So you talk about like maybe so they end up this big match between England and Argentina. And in Argentina, global South team with Maradona, who they already, don't like, it ends up winning. And how maybe just any context for that, but specifically like how maybe the background of the recent Falkland Wars, imperial British, war on Argentina to try to maintain territory that's just laughable, really. But how that maybe played a role in the British press, and just because this really whipped up a frenzy. We talked about the reaction to him, passing, but I mean the British public, or the British media, especially, going along with that, really had a problem with them, and like and how much of that was just them being sore losers versus just abject racism, really, you think?
Well, you ask about the background of the Falklands War, and this is kind of an important point because that match in 1996 between Argentina and England was clearly. If you see today in a YouTube video, you just have fun because you see like, the incredible moves of Maradona, the goal, the hand of God, and right. all the kind of epic. Which
is pretty much all Americans know about him, essentially.
Sure. But that was very powerful because why the hand of God became so incredible and was called the hand of God because. Actually, the Argentines were, the underdogs in that situation. England with its army kind of repelled the invasion of Argentina of the Falklands in 1982 in this disastrous operation run by the military dictatorship by a bunch of sociopaths who were in power in Argentina at the time. And who were looking for an opportunity to kind of distract the population from the incredible pillage and that neoliberal pillage that they had oversaw at the time. So of course that there are of course two different narratives here, or maybe more, but you have the British narrative and the Argentine narrative. The British would say, there was an invasion, so we were in we had the right to send everything we had there and repel the invasion, etc. From the Argentine point of view, you have, the kind of extremists who would say, this is a colony, so it was right to invade. We have to take back our territory that was occupied by England illegally in the 19th century. But at the same time, you have also, and this is probably, I think, the idea of Maradona, that, a more moderate kind of idea that was, yes, we had the fucking dictatorship at the time, horrible people who did something that wasn't right, but the disproportionate reaction of the Thatcher government that exploited that opportunity, because the Thatcher government was also in crisis. Probably right. Thatcher wouldn't have been reelected at the time if it wasn't for the Falkland War. And the disproportionate reaction of the British killed a lot of people, more than 600 people. Right. And of course, it was it was a war. It was an horrible moment. And it's very hard to say there was, one side was right. The two sides were very, very negative. We had Thatcher on one side and the military dictatorship backed by Thatcher as well at the end of the day. So it was very paradoxical.
Yeah, well, let me just jump in. I want to kind of apologize, atone for my historical ignorance there. I knew obviously that there was the dictatorship in Argentina, but obviously it's showing. It's a great example of some of the contradictions of imperialism. That that because of the dictatorship in Argentina and the fact that they're just trying to wave the flag essentially to cover up the fact that so many people are suffering, and they're going forward with a Pinochet type program essentially of shock doctrine economics that you invade. But then you also have the fact that, well, why is this British colony in 1982, it's with under any sort of normal standards of geography would be kind of part of Argentina, why is that something they get to hold on to, sort of thing? So I guess that's sort of the conundrum, that
absolutely. And there's still, this is still a big topic, of course. The Argentine official position is, of course, that Argentine considers the Malvinas, the Falkland Islands in English, Argentine territory, but Argentina will not use military force to ever to try to get them back. So they believe that by diplomatic means they should get those islands back at some point. So they are dispute territory, basically.
Right.
Yeah. So, your question was about the 1986.
And then we
match,
we get to that match and just the historical significance of it, and kind of how later on maybe that set the stage for some of the some of the narratives that came out of that maybe been reproduced over the years about Maradona and just what do you think? I guess whether it's the question. I should be more clear about this. Is not just about 1986, we know it's a huge moment, but the genesis sort of the real anti-Maradona press machine, and the fact that we know that they thought he was he was unclean, he was from the global south, he was poor, he was brash, he was not unapologetic, he was a rebel, he was going to live his life on his own terms and not conform to the standards of being a gentleman athlete or anything like that. But was that loss something that was bigger than just a loss for England? That it sort of maybe had implications in terms of what were the implications of that loss long term, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
You mean both in symbolic and
symbolic and symbolic. And then literal, in terms of people, in terms of the media and then obviously the media influencing the masses' opinion.
Well, I guess the biggest thing of that match was the hand. The use of a hand to score a goal.
Right. He's a cheater. Yeah.
He's a cheater, of course. Yeah. He's a cheater, and the thing was repeated in 1994 because he was, accused of doping, etc. So, and plus, the conflation between doping and the fact that he was a cocaine addict. That is also a thing. Yeah, I think the legacy, from the point of view of the media is, you don't score with a hand. If you do it, it means that you are a cheater, and therefore, that's it.
Yeah.
Even Lineker, though, like there was I think the captain of the England team at the time, and admitted that the second goal, there was, alleged one, was considered, the best goal in history and so on, was so amazing that they could only applaud when they got it.
Right.
That somehow, in his opinion, compensated. There is another point is that there is a playlist that you can find probably on YouTube with a collection of all the faults that England did against Maradona in that match. Mm-hmm. Maradona suffered, I don't know, maybe 30 falls. He was taken down continuously. It was a very, very aggressive.
Hold on, and these are not flops like you see now. These are legitimate, like he's falling because he's being physically engaged. It's not like these guys now that are faking it, sort of thing. These are legit.
Yeah. So, of course he cheated, but this is part of the history of the sport. This is what happened, and probably, Argentina could have won the game anyway. Because it was.
And not to mention, like, it's the referees have to call that. It's like, first of all, it's like, why would it be on him? Oh, it touched my hand, please disallow the goal. No athlete does that ever. Like, you play, if you get a break, you chalk it up to the fact that, well, the refs made this bad call against us, whatever. That's not your job as a player. It's to try to.
It's a competition, like these guys are there to win, and therefore every opportunity is good.
And why would he try to touch it with his hand if he had no idea the refs weren't going to call that? So sometimes such things happen, but then to try to go back and say that, like, this narrative that he's a cheater because he's taking rip fuel, like pills you get from GNC, and then his hand touches like the ball, and somehow like he should self-report himself or whatever. Nobody does that ever in sports. Like, so
also, these are two cases, and then it's like everything else doesn't matter. It's like, as if Maradona didn't have didn't have a huge professional career as a sportsman.
And as a coach too, right? He later on was much later. So real quick before I go on to some of the political stuff with Palestine and South America and Cuba, where was I going with that real quick? I kind of lost my train of thought there. Got too many things going at once, but it's just really mind blowing to me that whole competitive advantage thing is lit into, because it's just so hypocritical. It's just so laughably absurd, and it's clear that it's like, if you want. Oh, I know where I was going. Now I kind of have to get back on. What was the most absurd of all of the posthumous slander pieces that you saw? If you had to pick one that kind of like stood out to you, just like maybe like, what in the world, whether it was a headline or was it the New Yorker, I think, had something that came out. I'm trying to think about which was my mind's kind of confused, but what if you had to pick one out that or just any of them, they're all the same, that you found was like either just especially ridiculous or.
I think the most vicious and violent was one from Murdoch Media, Rupert Murdoch Media. I think The Australian is the name of the website, newspaper.
Is that Sky News? Is that no? I don't know. Is that Sky News or is that I'm not sure.
Well, Sky News is of course Murdoch Media as well.
Yeah.
But this is one of his
other properties.
Another property. And I think it's The Australian. That article was really extreme because it was pure moralism, basically, but like 14th century moralism, because it's really like all about why should we forgive Maradona now that he's dead? This was the kind of question of the article was starting with. And the article was a list of all the terrible things Maradona has done in life that should stop us from forgiving him.
Right.
I mean, it's an obsession. The guy is not even, I don't know, a war criminal, for example.
Right.
Or
we could forgive George W. Bush and let him make paint his watercolor paintings of soldiers and whatever else. Right. That's fine. Of course, all the liberal resistance was all too happy to do that for him and Bill Kristol and the whole, cabal of war criminals that were behind the invasion of Iraq that obviously led to the rise of Islamic State and the destabilization of the whole region. I like to call it, shout out to East as a podcast for pointing out that we should really stop using the term Middle East. It's really kind of an Orientalist term, and call it Western Asia. So we'll go with Western Asia there. So anyways, to move on real quick, talk about maybe before we move on from Maradona, it just that his support. In 1987 he went and visited Cuba at first. We also know that his solidarity with the Palestinians was legendary, and also his support for the diplomatic struggle of Bolivia to gain access to the ocean as being, I believe they're the only landlocked country in South America. Completely, yeah. So, and then also his support for the Pink Tide leaders that were elected throughout South America prior to kind of this U.S. reaction to that led to the Lima group we've seen most recently and whatnot. But yeah,
of course. I mean, I think this is probably one of the most interesting aspects of the character. We talk about sport, but there was this kind of evolution of the man. That is, I don't know, fascinating to observe. Maradona didn't have a high education. Maradona started playing professional football when he was 15, didn't have the time to go to university, college, didn't have the money. Maradona grew up in a family that experienced hunger in several moments in his childhood. So he wasn't an educated man who could have, readings and an understanding of history and geopolitics by himself. He didn't learn these kind of things from an intellectual path, but he learned it from more of a personal experience and meetings with people. And one of, probably, this is my personal interpretation, but I think it's pretty obvious, one of the most important meetings that probably played a role in this evolution is the meeting with Fidel Castro in 1987, when he had to decide. This is something he tells in his film with Kusturica, by the way. It was very nice.
What was the name of that film?
Maradona, I think.
Yeah, okay. So that's the one that came out, I think, just a year ago or so, 2019 one?
No. This is another one. Kusturica, I think it was 10 years ago. It's pretty old. It's not really up to date, but it's very beautiful because the two characters are there. Gotcha. And the two characters are interesting. Both Kusturica is a Serbian director and Maradona. So they interact and it's very, very interesting conversations. And yes, in one of those situations, actually, he's in his. They both are visiting his Maradona's house in Villa Fiorito, when it is the house of his childhood, a very poor, humble house, and they are sitting in the table. And Maradona tells that he, in 1987, he was, he was at the height of his professional career. He was a superstar, and he received 2 awards, one in the United States and one in Cuba. And he says, and I decided to go to Cuba to take my award, right? And there was a kind of a turning point, because he arrived in Cuba and he met with Fidel Castro, and he says that they've been chatting, discussing for about 5 hours about politics, football, Argentina, Cuba, and everything. And he fell in love with Castro. He even defined Castro as a second father. And Castro also helped him a lot with his addiction, giving him, a lot of support in Cuba to be followed by doctors and to rest, to have spaces where he could isolate from the kind of jet set, the media, the crowd, because Maradona couldn't go anywhere. Like Cuba was probably one of the few places where he could walk around. Nobody cares. Nobody likes football in Cuba.
No, they're baseball centered there.
Yeah. So he really enjoyed his time in Cuba, and so I think these kind of connections transformed his worldview basically. And made, I don't know how many, stars, Western stars met with Castro and had this kind of experience to basically grow up and learn from a leader like that. So I think his later kind of activism and as a, kind of anti-imperialist symbol came from there. So so he's been supporting unapologetically, which in my opinion is priceless. It's so important that people who have a platform, have a voice, say something that is true about imperialism, about the struggles of Latin American movements, and the things that you listed are it's accurate. He supported Bolivia, the struggle of Bolivia to obtain access to the sea. That is a diplomatic struggle that's been going on for several years, and Evo Morales also tried to bring it to the international court in Haya, and he also supported like all the pink tide leaders. He was a big friend of the Kirchners. He was a big friend of Lula, Chavez, of course, Maduro, etc.
And so I mean, you had the quote in 2014 when Israel was yet again one of their many bombardments of the Gaza Strip in Palestine, said that he was the number one fan of the Palestinian people. He actually made comments about being what did he say specifically here? And then he was he called it the attack shameful. It's and just but and was just and this I was just one example. I mean, the different intifadas he also set up. So he clearly, I think his background, it just shows you too, like your point about not being having learned growing up in the university setting, that lived experience and interaction with different people in the world and is just as much of a tool for learning as possible. And a lot of the sort of the arrogance and the highfalutin stuff about like if you don't really have, we live in a society where it's so much like you got to have a certain degree to be able to like even speak on something, instead of encouraging every citizen of the world to potentially be someone who could be a journalist, who can do an active journalism, or who can learn about these things and should engage with these things, right? Instead of just and obviously we're not acting as if like expertise is irrelevant. I'm just saying I think it's clear that he was able to make connections between the oppression of the slums.
I mean, it's a different role.
Yeah,
it's a different role, right? It's legitimate to have voices that come from other backgrounds that have an opinion, and we don't just need academics teaching us about geopolitics and anti-imperialism. We also need like working class people and probably sportsmen to say something.
Exactly. Which is a perfect transition to the absurdity that's been going on the past week or so here in the States. And I think probably wrap on this because so Jimmy Dore, the comedian and political commentator, YouTuber, comes out and talks about how the squad, and most prominently AOC, should leverage their support for their voting for Nancy Pelosi for Speaker of the House again, on the condition that there's a floor vote for Medicare for all, knowing it's not going to pass. But the point is getting people on the record so we know where you stand. You voted against this in the midst of a pandemic where 300,000 Americans have died, right? It's useful to put people on the record, right? So we have that. So to talk about, but then we've had this backlash, and one of the most ridiculous responses is from Anna Kasparian, the Young Turks. Then you have Sam Cedar with the Majority Report, and Emma Vidlin, who's been on there with him now, really took Michael Brooks's role in the show. Who R.I.P., who passed away over the summer. But they were on there, and the other guest, Nomiki, what I don't want to butcher her name, but I almost don't even care given what she was saying, Nomiki or whatever. But anyway, that's her first name. They're just bringing up this stuff about Jimmy Dore taking money from like the Assad regime and whatnot. Again, like in like now, we don't like how he like. He's it's misogynist the way he's going after. So he has problematic like ways of dealing with women, and that like his ways of being combative are like unproductive. But I mean, it's like you said, like with these pundits and academics, and they're not even academics; they're just like semi-mainstream politicos. I mean, Sam Cedar goes on MSNBC as a commentator sometimes, so I'd say let's say mainstream. That they're more concerned about the tactics. It just shows why we have this phenomenon in the States and also in Europe where like these right-wing demagogues are able to siphon off like populist anger from people who are working class, who have been left behind. Because when they see the Democratic Party that's selling them nothing but identity politics, look, and I'm not one of these class reductionists to say that talking about race is not important. It's central, because if you don't talk about race and national oppression of African Americans in the United States, historically, what kind of revolutionary, are you really? I mean, because that's such a central role to the creation of, even though race is a social construct, it's been one that's been used for, 500 years to create the conditions we have. And they're on there literally saying stuff like, oh, he's like an Assadist. Oh, he's he's so like crude and rough, and this is just unproductive. Like, he doesn't know how things really work in Washington, and like how important these committee chairs are. Well, guess what you got for like not going forward with this AOC? You didn't even get the committee chair you want because Nancy Pelosi picked someone else. So like the whole obsession here is like, They act like they're playing this chess game while everyone else is playing checkers. And ultimately, when is the right time? There's never a convenient time when you're up against like a bureaucracy that will do anything to try to prevent healthcare from being something that goes into the public domain, to where we can actually reduce drug prices like massively. Insulin could be available. You won't have these price gouging of like drugs like we have here. You won't have these patents that last for years that prevent people from being able to get medicine. I mean, I just know going to pick up prescriptions myself at like Walgreens, in not a very fairly low-income neighborhood, that there's just constantly people in line you see that are like being told, oh, your insurance isn't covering this, you got to call your doctor's office back, and they're sitting there with their kid who's like sick or something, and it's like that just doesn't happen in places with national health. The people that get all upset about this are always the people that feel like it's their right to be able to skip everyone else in line because they're wealthy and they don't want to be in the same pool of people, right? With all
they have healthcare.
Yeah. With all the unclean masses of people like Maradona, for instance, the people like him, they think that like suddenly, oh, I'm so successful and deserving of my privilege. Why should I have to then go and be amongst these unclean people, and have my healthcare compromised, and maybe not be able to see the exact doctor I want to. Meanwhile, people are dying, right? And it's like, I don't know. I saw you were tweeting some about this like issue, and I'm just kind of curious what your thoughts are about any of this stuff, about the academics, the arrogance of media, and the way they're trying to make this a personality. Who cares? You can hate Jimmy Dore, in my opinion, but it's about, you support doing something are you ready to fight for something? Because, power never concedes anything without a demand. But what's your take on it all?
right. I mean, it's surreal. The attacks on Jimmy Dore are. I mean, I really
I know
make no sense because Jimmy Dore is actually suggesting something.
Yeah.
These people have been
Wait,
apparently fighting for and getting votes for.
Yeah.
I mean, their name is associated with that.
Yeah.
It's associated with universal healthcare in the U.S. It's associated with Medicare for all, and like it's one of their most important fights. So when are they going to do something? What's the best time? What's the good time? What's the right moment?
We got to get some more committee chairs and build up our majority a little bit. We don't want to step on some toes. Remember, and I also just real quick interject. I forgot probably the worst thing they said about all this, which was they were really going in about how this whole issue with tactics and everything that Jimmy Dore is actually just trying to do this for monetary gain. Someone who himself almost went bankrupt medically, and they're acting like, oh, he bought $1 million something house in near Los Angeles. First of all, that's not even that much money for a house in Los Angeles. I mean, or New York. I mean, you're in. He's had a modicum of success. I mean, that is compared to the amount of money that gets spent on BS and the amount of money that Rachel Maddow makes every episode she does, and yet to pull this kind of BS out, it shows you have an agenda. And the idea that he's gaslighting his supporters, which is what Emma Vigeland on the Majority Report with Sam Seder was saying with in no uncertain terms that. And this is, I'm going to go in on her for a second, all right? Because she was with TYT and she's growing up in a very wealthy North Jersey suburb. I live in Jersey City, right across the river from Lower Manhattan now, even though I'm from the American South, but this is where I've lived for about a little over 5 years now. And she's from an extraordinarily wealthy family. I mean, they are, tied in, they're club seat people with the New York Giants games, and they are very connected within Wall Street, and I think they're attorneys with people that are movers and shakers. And I'm not one of these people that wants to say that who your parents are should be something you should have to apologize for. But it's just amazing to me that in this context, whether or not Medicare for all gets done or not, for her, it's theoretical. I mean, at least me, even though I've grown up privileged. I mean, my dad is a circuit court trial judge in Florida. It's not to that extent by any means. And I also have dealt with nightmares in healthcare, playing American football, having some devastating back injuries. I've still struggled every single day of my life with having to deal with the long-term effects of that, and the reality that I could never get healthcare on the open market. It's I like what I do teaching, but but it also is depressing to know that if I did want to go take a chance to do something else, maybe do this full time, right? Maybe go into anything where you'd have to kind of work independently, that I wouldn't be able to get health insurance from anybody. I mean, the whole idea, you have all the pre-existing conditions and surgeries and all that. I'm a huge liability. I am not profitable at all. I'll freely admit that. So, but for her, for Emma Vigeland, it's theoretical. It's we want Medicare for all. Of course, she'll say, right? Sam Seder too. We want Medicare for all, but it's about how we get there. But how are you ever going to get there without pissing some people off, without yelling? And this is what pisses off the masses in this country, is hearing this BS constantly about tone policing and saying you shouldn't be outraged and let's be more concerned with our civility and all this bullshit like that, than we are about actually fighting for people against a system that we see cares nothing about the masses in this country, and not to mention around the world, the people that are suffering under the boot of U.S. imperialism. But the desperate landscape we're in. And the fact that what people are facing is somehow the response to that is we need to be more polite and civil. I just can't. I'm sorry. Take the floor.
Yeah, I mean, this disconnection between, as you say, the theoretical aspect of the struggle for universal healthcare and the reality that people live without, people who don't have a good healthcare insurance is really something that I understand. You know, it's horrible to observe from outside. Like I've lived and grew up in countries that have universal healthcare, and these countries are honestly like much poorer probably like Italy and Argentina than the United States, but Argentina of course much poorer, but still, you know, you have ways to get something out of the public system, and you would not be let, you know, just completely alone if you had something serious. So it's very, you know, I totally understand that it's incredible because these theoretical strategies that are like a sort of intellectualization of the problem. Like, yeah, in principle, we would need to have universal healthcare, but we need to find the right moment to do it. We need to, you know, think about it as a political tactic that, no, I mean, this is a basic need that we need right now because there is a pandemic.
Right.
And there are tens of millions of people who are also going, you know, falling into unemployment and are going to lose their insurance and so on and so forth. So it's urgent. It's something that we have to discuss right now. It's not something that you have to build who knows when.
Yeah, and part of it just shows the limitations of their imagination, the reality that this is the system we have now, therefore it always will be, and therefore we just have to learn to play within the machinations of it, is just ahistorical. I mean, nothing has ever just been permanently fixated, like, you know, in terms of politics, even the most powerful empires. And, you know, there's a big difference between the U.S. government and, you know, the people of this country. And there's a lot of ignorance that's fueled by mainstream corporate media. And there's a lot of, reactionary views and backwards views. But there's a lot of people that there's a growing just discontent. There's a growing realization that American exceptionalism, they've been duped by that. And I think that for someone like Emma Vigeland or Sam Cedar, like their imagination ends with like what can be done within the confines of electoral politics, really. I mean, they say there needs to be movement building, needs to be unions and all that, but how do you do that? You have to get out and like be active in a union. You have to like, you know, actually, you know, go out and like not just, you know, be a journalist and all that, but like actually meet people and go see what goes on and report on, like, you know, these union movements. Just to say the American labor movement is so weak, we already know that Reagan here and then Thatcher in the UK, you know, really, you know, took a sledgehammer to the labor movements in both countries. But the notion that there's not people fighting, there's not insurgent movements within like American unions, shows that like you just aren't paying attention to that, because the reality is so much of history happens outside of the eyes of, you know, people that are in media that report on this stuff. I mean, it's not glamorous. It's not like it's grunt work. You're going in, you're organizing your shop floor. There's struggles to organize Amazon places. There's Teamsters union people that work at UPS that are ridiculously overloaded, especially this time of year, that are trying to build resistance to their labor aristocracy and their union that sold them out. But they don't talk about these things. It's just, the labor unions are so weak, you know? And it just drives me insane, man. But anyways, I know we got to wrap here soon. I've been keeping you for a while here, but I did want to just, last thing, just ask you about, you know, I know you collaborated with Ben Norton, some with from the Grayzone on just looking into this issue of this insane IMF loan that was given to Argentina, and not that long ago, really. And maybe just talk about that and how it's sort of a case in point of the economic terrorism the IMF does on a global level, because this one's really egregious, it seems like, and I need to know more about it myself. But where they give a loan knowing full well there's no way they can pay it back, in order to then justify, hey, well, now we can either take over or just destroy what was left of the public sector. If you could just maybe tell the audience about that, and then also maybe where they can find you on social media and any of that good stuff would be cool.
Yeah, sure. Well, I mean, the history of the Argentine debt is very, very complex and long. But yeah, what happened relatively recently with the IMF, last IMF loan, which is just the last one of many, is quite extreme because, well, first of all, it was the biggest loan in the history of the IMF, and of course also in the history of Argentina, single loan. It was about $57 billion loan. And it was done in the context of a country that was
And what year was it, the loan issue?
2018.
Okay.
2018, it was negotiated and then accepted with the support of Donald Trump, very, very strong support of Donald Trump. Apparently, there was a conflict within the IMF for this loan. The Europeans were against it, but Donald Trump was, put a lot of pressure so that the loan was accepted because Donald Trump was looking for some support for his fight against Venezuela. And Argentina was a pretty important actor there. Mauricio Macri, the former president at the time, was one of the most important puppets, I would say. He didn't have any real foreign policy apart from just doing what the White House would tell him to do. So the reason why Donald Trump insisted in getting this loan out was, of course, Venezuela, but also was because Mauricio Macri would have probably not even been able to finish his term. He wasn't at the middle of his term. He was after only 2 years. He had already basically opened the Argentine finances, deregulated the exchange currency. He got already billions and billions of loans in terms of bonds issued by the government. So Argentina was already in default almost at the time, and they needed support from the IMF. Otherwise, Argentina would have defaulted already in 2018, and Mauricio Macri would have probably just...
Yeah. So let's get into more debt to the economic hitman of the IMF in order to try to get out of debt to the economic hitman.
Exactly. That's exactly what happened. That's exactly what happened.
If you could just, briefly, like just sort of like the Venezuela angle, we know like the economic war and the disgusting, the U.S.'s role, and it's criminal. I mean, the using sanctions as war to, prevent Venezuelans from getting, the food they need, medicines they need. If it weren't for Russia and China helping to fill the gap, Iran with the oil, because they can't even, despite having the most oil in the world, really refine their oil now because all the big capital infrastructure has made sure to shut down operation. So, and obviously the Venezuelan gold has been seized and is in the United Kingdom now under control of England. And even Maduro, I think, made a proposition to say that gold should be used to help pay for like pandemic supplies for relief and whatnot. And that was just like, oh no, we can't do that. Of course, he's an evil dictator. And I don't know if you paid attention to this either too, and it's to be just add on to that sort of like maybe the connection with Venezuela, Argentina, and how the U.S. war on Venezuela, played a role in wanting Trump to get involved with pushing the IMF. But, just look at the side-by-side comparison. I think Dan Cohen did a good job of his reporting down there of what's going on in Colombia. And just like the absurd, like election monitors not even being allowed in, violence against, of course, the peasants, labor union leaders, FARC people, obviously. And yet not a peep about Colombia, which is just literally U.S. South. I mean, and Ivan Duque is just, Trump of South America. But anyways, so I guess there's a connection you mentioned about like the Trump's desire to get the extended loan to Argentina. I guess they thought that would hurt Venezuela further.
Well, I mean, it was part of the plan to keep a pressure from the entire region against Venezuela, of course, and Argentina is, of course, one of the actors that Trump needed. I think that in 2018, Venezuela had its presidential election. It was boycotted by the opposition under orders of course, of the United States. And in 2019, we had the entire Guaido fictional operation, like self-proclaimed president. Yeah. And of course, you need as many countries as you can to kind of play this game of the president of Narnia, as they, as the foreign minister of Venezuela, Reaza, called him. So, I mean, yes, it's a situation that was the situation of the law was strictly connected to these kind of movements in the region. The sad part of what you are saying is that, yes, Venezuela has been completely isolated in the region for many, many years, which is pretty shameful for Latin Americans. Only a couple of days ago, I've seen like the celebration of the mayor of Bogota, who is a progressive woman who's been elected last year with a lot of great expectations, to have a progressive for the first time. A person that was an activist of the LGBT movement in Colombia, prominent activist, and in power in a city like Bogota, something unprecedented. And she celebrated yesterday a meeting with Leopoldo Lopez, who's a terrorist and fugitive, Venezuelan terrorist and fugitive, supported by the entire Western Hemisphere, basically, including Latin American countries.
The Lima Group, right? Yeah.
The Lima Group, yeah, exactly. So it's kind of sad to see that Latin Americans struggle so much to even progressive, to kind of create an independent view on the political dynamics of Latin America. We are really colonized by the U.S. media, by the Western media. Most of our media monopolies in Argentina, but also in Brazil, but also in monopolies or oligopolies or whatever, are just translations of U.S. media, basically, right?
Yeah.
So it's very, very hard to kind of to have people openly supporting Venezuela, even in the left in Latin America, which is really, really sad.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, there's some silver linings. I mean, the people of Bolivia still, in spite of all the odds against them, very rarely do coups become undone. And I guess because it was such a clear victory, there was no ambiguity about it. The military decided to go along with it. So I think that's definitely a silver lining and something to look to for hope. Yeah. The fact that there's solidarity between other countries helping Venezuela, the non-aligned countries, and that are resisting U.S. sanctions, and is also inspiring. I mean, there's no doubt that these Venezuelan exiles and the wealthy, I mean, they just say it in their own words. I mean, now that they want to see the U.S. invade their own country. And one thing I found really ironic is that, you get on, like, Roger Waters put a solidarity message out. I've responded to one of the escuelitos of the Venezuelan right, and these are not just the opposition. It's clearly important to distinguish. Like, there are legitimate, like, people of the opposition that are not like these far right Juan Guaido, like, U.S. coup people. So let's don't paint with a broad brush here. But these people that are like the online trolls that come after you, it's hilarious that they want to talk about. They're like weaponizing the sort of like leftist, like, discourse on identity politics about, like, you can't have, like, a white, toxic masculinity infused, American guy talking about Venezuela. Kind of like the Israel lobby does this too. Have you ever been to Israel? Like, you can't say anything about Palestine. Like, under that logic, it's like only people that have enough money to globetrot around the world can like actually study and have opinions or solidarity with anybody, right? So it's like,
Yeah.
it's in and of itself, it shows a very privileged mindset, right? That you just think like anyone can just afford to hop on planes and go check stuff out for themselves. But what was so hilarious?
It's always the very interesting topic of the right, of the good Jew, or the
Yeah,
good Venezuelan, or the good, and then there is the bad Jew and the bad
right.
Venezuelan.
Yeah. And like one of those
Right?
is one of those bad Venezuelans. I'll go ahead and turn my camera real quick to show who I'm a big fan of here is none other than Maglio Ordonez,
Oh
who was
yeah.
a star outfielder and power hitter for the Chicago White Sox and then the Detroit Tigers, helping take the Detroit Tigers to the World Series and winning the American League in 2006. And he became the mayor of the fourth largest city in Venezuela as a Chavista. And I recommend anybody type in Maglio Ordonez, Venezuela, baseball, like, or even like Miami World Baseball Classic, and you see the crowd there when he comes to bat for the Venezuela national team. Just literally, like, if they could have just run on the field, if there wouldn't have been security, they would have just murdered him. Like that. That's like for their own team. They're like pulling for him to strike out, because it's like, oh, he's like with Chavez, like he's a dog. He's a, blah, blah, blah. Like, it reminds me of like being with like, Max Blumenthal outside the embassy in DC too, where we were, Anya Parampil was inside and other people we know, they were, inside, on the behest of the legitimate government of Venezuela to prevent this fake government from coming in there, and just being around that and trying to get food in there, and like this whole like little like army of like exiles, many of them, if you found it, are worked for weapons manufacturers and defense contractors and right-wing think tanks, are out there just vicious, vile, like racist stuff towards dark-skinned people, LGBTQ people, all this stuff that like they try to, of course, never talk about when they're in front of the media, but they love to like go and talk about like, oh, you're being paid by Maduro, and like you're being blah blah blah, you're being paid by Russia to be here, and like it's so mind blowing on so many levels. But the main thing with me that they were coming at me hard when I came on to Roger Waters' defense was that, oh, like another, this is Venezuelan mansplaining. This man, like he's this white guy who's like hanging out in a Starbucks up in like like New York City and like chilling out, like, well, people are suffering and dying. I'm like, well, why are people suffering and dying? Might it be something to do with sanctions, with an embargo, a blockade? Might it be the fact that you people who are mad at me for defending the elections that, Kay Pritzker check out the interview Abby Martin did with him about the actual election security in Venezuela, these elections. It makes what goes on here like seem like laughable by comparison. You got fingerprint like scanning, you got like two different layers of paper ballot, the digital ballot. It's just a joke, and then so you obviously just boycott it so you can just say it's a fraud, but it's just not. And you realize that these people just cannot be reasoned with, man. Like that's the point. I just got to the point where it's not even worth engaging with them. I mean, Jim Deere, who's a DJ up here, is, I know, friends with Max and others we know, was telling me, DJ Small Change, that is, it's like you just gotta like not give them the satisfaction of just like arguing. You're talking to a wall. These people, like anything you say, it's like they're not arguing in good faith. They are mad at you about like supposed identity politics, like you're telling Venezuelans what they should think. First of all, I'm not really, and those people don't represent all Venezuelans, secondly. But you're also asking the Americans to come invade your own country and have a bunch of people who are not Venezuelan come in there and tell Venezuelans what to do. I don't know, man. The world's just crazy, crazy place. But nonetheless, let's go ahead and wrap right now. I think, and I'll just give you the floor to close out. I mean, I know that I'd like to hear. I was looking at your website. Maybe you just tell the audience, what kind of designing, programming stuff you do for your work, and then where they can find you on Twitter. Where you have a lot of good stuff you put out there. And I appreciate your time, man. Really,
Yeah. Thank you very much, Nate. I really appreciate the chat. Very, very interesting. And yeah, I mean, my activity, my professional activity is not necessarily always connected to my political activism, let's say.
Yeah.
But yeah, when possible, I try to contribute to projects that have some kind of political background.
Do you like website design, computer programming type
It's
stuff?
mostly like interactive applications and mostly animations and things that are strongly visual stuff.
We might need to talk about some editing stuff here.
Yeah, we can. Yeah, of course, with pleasure. And no, you can find me, of course, on Twitter. This is where I can be found easily. I don't have any other social media activity, so I'm there.
Yeah, and I'll just say it real quick. It's at Taseen B. That's at TASEEN B as in boy, right? At Taseen B on Twitter. So check him out. It's a good follow. And hey, thanks again. And everybody else out there, enjoy the holidays. We'll try to get some other. Who knows? This might even come out after the holidays are over, but hopefully not. So whenever it comes out, look, we appreciate everybody's support. And until next time, take care and be well. All right.
Right.